I would like to thank the organizers, especially the Secretary General, Mr. Diop, for the kind invitation to address you today in such a marvelous conference and in what is a significant issue to me as Latin American, peaceful coexistence in the region regarding religious freedom. I personally believe that Latin America and the Caribbean is currently a blessed region regarding religious liberty, because our territories are free from religious persecution as happens in other countries. In this context, religious organizations have the chance to be part of the solution and contribute to peaceful coexistence beyond religious freedoms as it is needed now, especially in Venezuela. We need to be aware that when there is lack of rule of law in our territories, religious organizations have the voice of those who don't have it. How to address peaceful coexistence within pluralism in Latin America? And mainly, is there any pluralism in Latin America, or is it still an homogeneous region where peaceful coexistence regarding religion is granted because of it? Why to talk about Latin America that, at least in this area, seems to have no significant issues or no conflicts regarding religious freedom? It seems that besides countries that in some ranking appears with a level of concern, like Cuba and Venezuela, sometimes followed by Mexico and Colombia, there are no current experiences of hostility to religion as it occurs in other continents. I'm not saying that there are no conflicts. It is just that comparing the level of them, at least we can exclude persecution due to religious beliefs as it happens in other places. On the other hand, it doesn't seem there is a particular model behind this. So it requires a systematic effort to understand what is going on. It might be helpful to distinguish three dimensions. First, a particular kind of pluralism. Secondly, the legal framework and judicial challenges at regional level. And in third place, current events that find their explanation in historical background. Regarding pluralism in Latin America, it is true that it doesn't have the levels that it has in other regions, even if we include indigenous peoples' beliefs. To describe pluralism in Latin America and the Caribbean, it is useful to remember that according to the Pew Research Center survey among 18 countries called Religion in Latin America, Widespread Change in a Historical Catholic Region of 2014, according to it, Catholics decreased from 90% in the 60s to 69% nowadays. Correlated with this decline in Catholic affiliation, traditional Protestant faiths grow, such as Methodists, Baptists, and also Pentecostals. However, what is new in the increase of unaffiliated Christian denominations being correlated with the growth of Protestant faith. Still now, 40% of Roman Catholics live in the region, that is about 425 million people. At least a third part of current Christians, non-Catholics, were raised in the Catholic Church, and half of them were baptized as Catholics. But what is even more interesting is the high percentage of any Christian believers that also shares at least some practice of native people's spirituality. According to the study, at least a third of adults in every country surveyed believed in evil eye. Also, 60% of Mexican and also almost 40% of Bolivians say they make offerings of food, drinks, candles, or flowers to spirits, but just 1 in 10 Uruguayans do so. As the study says, the survey finds the highest level of indigenous of Afro-Caribbean religious practice in Panama, where most people, 58%, engage in at least 3 out of 8 indigenous beliefs and practices mentioned in the service. It might be also interesting to underline that according to 2017 Pew Research study, the increase of Muslims in the region is 25%. Nevertheless, according to the same study, Latin America will remain Christian despite the fact that by 2030, Muslims should be the majority around the world. It has to be said that so far, it seems to be a Latin American way of being Muslim due to the time when the first of them arrived and the small numbers of Muslim migrants that we have now and have permitted their integration in the region. All this change has happened without conflicts, and that might be something that we need to be more aware of. Then the legal framework and judicial challenges at regional level, I would like to underline just a few things, like 4 constitutions make a special recognition of Catholicism. 1 constitution among the 33 of the countries that belong, besides Canada and United States of America, that belong to the Organization of American States. 1 constitution says Catholicism is their state religion, granting at the same time religious freedom to other beliefs. That happens in Costa Rica. 4 other fundamental texts say that there can't be any official religion. Bolivian and Cuban constitutions say the state is independent of religion. And within the region, 11 countries have some formal kind of agreement with the Holy See. Only 4 countries have particular either religious liberty or religious organizations laws. So far, special non-discrimination laws are enforced in 7 countries. Some of these laws are regarding non-discrimination and mainly address gender inequality, hate speech, or race. In federal states like Argentina and Brazil, non-discrimination laws are enforced in some states. Indigenous and tribal peoples' conventions from the International Labour Organization is enforced in 14 countries. There are 2 recent conventions, and yesterday we talked about that, but I would like to underline that the Inter-American Convention Against All Forms of Discrimination and Intolerance has been signed by 10 states and hasn't been yet ratified by any country. Nevertheless, Bolivia has already initiated the path to confirm it, and it seems that Argentina will follow. Given that it's required only 2 countries to ratify it, that means that it might be enforced soon. The definition of discrimination in this text might collide with our rights, such as freedom of conscience or beliefs, as well as with freedom of expression. At regional level, some judicial decisions also seem to imply a turning point indirectly in the understanding of religious liberty so far. I'm talking about the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. There is some interesting jurisprudence on spiritual matters regarding indigenous peoples' cases, such as the right to bury their beloved ones in order not to leave them exposed to the risk of spiritual or physical disease. While the court uses a comprehensive concept regarding indigenous peoples' issues, it hasn't addressed Article 12 besides saying it's a significant pillar of democratic society. To my knowledge, this could be a significant step towards the erosion of concept of religious freedom that Professor Durham underlines. Then, and finally, current events that find their explanation in historical background. We know that peaceful experiences come after conflicts. In this region, conflicts haven't been understood as terrorism or threats to national security regarding religious liberty. Even despite the burning of temples in the last years in some countries and the assassination of some priests by paramilitary corps, those events are usually understood as either as political facts or some revenge or vindication. Due to the isolated nature of them, they don't rise to a new level of hostility against religion. Many of us might remember the AMIA bombing in 1994 in Argentina. The attack to a Jewish association still has no judicial closure, although it happened more than 20 years ago. But it remains as a unique attack. So there are some unsolved issues regarding religious freedom in Latin America, but it seems that there is a way where living together exclude the possibility of threats that come from religious liberty or are directed to hurt religious freedom. As you may guess, I think that so far, peaceful coexistence has been a sort of experience in the region that has evolved since the presence of Spanish and Portuguese. Catholic presence remains, and so continues collaboration within religious organizations as a challenge that hasn't been as violent as in other regions. Current peaceful coexistence in Latin America is also the consequence of the mission of religious organizations in the 80s. They were by far the ones that collaborated to bring peace and democracy to the region. Despite some shades, the status of religious organizations in society remains today, and religious organizations in Latin America enjoy of the prestige that deserves to have had the courage to be next to the people in times of great disturbance. I think that to maintain peaceful coexistence in Latin America, we can use Professor Silvio Ferrari's explanation of religious freedom of belief. In fact, understanding religious freedom on the grounds of the notions of embedded even-handedness and particular universalities might help to live together facing difficulties and even conflicts or threats. As Professor Ferrari sustains, the acceptance of the role of history and culture as a unique framework within which this right is embedded has to engage in a way that it is possible to overcome the limitations of a particular context and helps in new approaches. At the same time, the universal dimension of religious freedom that we share mainly in international conventions has to be implemented in particular ways according to different experiences. Both embedded even-handedness and particular universalities are in fact different aspects of the path that Latin American countries have been following in a very spontaneous way. History has a role regarding religion, and we can't expect to act without taking it into account. Also, some of the recent experiences in the region as interreligious commissions might be a way to preserve peaceful coexistence, not only in society, but within religious organizations. It doesn't mean it's the only way to implement religious freedom throughout Latin America, but it's an experience that might be shared and applied differently according to the circumstances. And just to finish these presentations, let me give you two short examples that might give a picture of what, in my opinion, should be the goal of collaboration among religious organizations, since we can ask a lot of things to our governments to do, but it's easier to start from home, from our own religious organizations. Each of us might have experienced these examples in some way or another, being either the majority or the minority at some point in their life or history. The first one is that a Nobel Prize professor from MIT once told in a conference in my country that the applications that they have in their university were from students that through their studies have been always the first or second in their class. So the experience to get into MIT was the first time that just one were going to be the first one in the class. So they decided to make a kind of survey, and they asked them, would you prefer to earn $100,000 a year and the one behind you will earn $99,000, or you would like to earn $10,000 a year and the ones who follow you $1,000 a year? Most of them, the vast majority of them, answered that they prefer to earn less but with more difference from the others than to earn a little bit more than the others. To me, this is quite evident that we may think that this example per se is not a good approach to experience solidarity. And let's not experience this kind of attitude among religious organizations, avoiding the others next to us to enjoy what we have conquered through years. And the second and final example, I have learned this year in Mexico that some kinds of coffee, especially the ones from our region, grow under the shadow of another tree. I don't drink coffee, I have to say, but I thought it was interesting to know that. And it seemed interesting to me that sometimes the shadow is not suffocating. On the contrary, it allows us to grow. It seems to me that sometimes experience being minority brings a kind of frustration that leads us into the willing of eliminate all sorts of majorities. But perhaps it's useful to remember that the so-called shade coffee might taste as good as sharing our path with others. Thank you very much.